Hello and welcome back to Perspectives. On today's show, is India planning a new shocking Air India type terrorist atrocity to blame once again on the Khalistan movement? Well, that's the belief within parts of the Western Sikh community. With Punjab polls imminent and India ramping up the anti-Sikh and, of course, the anti-Khalistan propaganda, we'll take a look at India's well-worn playbook to control the narrative, or at least try to. A historic constitutional crisis shakes Punjab as the Akal Takht brands sitting Chief Minister Bhagwant Mann a Guru Dokhi ahead of a high-stakes showdown over his own controversial sacrilege laws. And later, we take you directly to the borders of Uttarakhand, where a peaceful Sikh pilgrimage has turned into a cross-state border siege of battalions of angry Nihangs, amidst horrific allegations of course, unsurprisingly, custody torture and open Hindutva threats to repeat the genocide of June 1984. Well, nothing ever changes, does it, in India? All this and more on today's show, and of course at the end of the show we'll take a look at loads of great comments, so thank you as always for that. Now, as usual, quite a lot to get through this morning, and yes, I've really noticed over even the last few days, never mind the last few weeks, something's really happening across social media, and it's quite concerning, and it ties into things that other people in the community have noticed. I want to take a critical look at a bit of a pattern, and it's a dangerous pattern that's starting to repeat itself across the media, both mainstream and social media. Now, if you've been watching the headlines coming out of Delhi over the past few days, you'll have noticed a sudden massive spike in sensational stories about the Khalistan threat. I mean, here's one of many. The question that we always have to ask is pretty simple. Why now? Why is it happening right now at this precise moment? Well, to find the true answer, we don't need to look at security reports. We look at the political calendar, of course. It always comes down to, this isn't just particular to India, it actually happens ironically all over the world. When it comes close to election times, of course, the narrative starts to change, doesn't it, from every quarter. Now, the assembly elections in Punjab are steadily approaching. And for those who track Indian politics closely, it's an established reality that whenever a major election is on the horizon, the BJP always looks for a powerful narrative to try to polarise voters and therefore, of course, try and secure their majority. It's part of their dirty tricks campaign. It's their standard playbook. We saw it in West Bengal recently, and we're now seeing it in Punjab. Now, in states like Uttar Pradesh or indeed Bengal that we saw, the playbook is very familiar. They rely very heavily on Hindu-Muslim divisions and Hindu minority divisions to build that voting bloc, particularly to really encourage that usual Hindu majority to vote for the BJP. Remember, they always campaign on this nationalist ticket, this nationalist extremist ticket. That's how they won the last elections, in fact, the last three elections. But in Punjab, that standard specific script is failing. It just doesn't work in Punjab because the social and religious fabric of Punjab is different. It doesn't bend to that kind of polarisation that works across other states in India. And so, the state machinery of India defaults to an older, highly volatile methodology. They create this deep climate of fear and suspicion, particularly around the Sikh community. Here we go again. As I said in the introduction, here we go again. Do things ever change in India? Now, this was highlighted actually, in fact, this article recently in the print. It was an opinion piece in the print, and it forensically tracked the BJP's evolving election strategy for the Punjab region. So, it's not gone unnoticed, even by relatively mainstream Indian media. And senior political figures tied to the central government, people like Girish Mahajan in Maharashtra, have recently made highly publicised controversial comments. I've talked about many of them in recent weeks. And they're intentionally stirring up memories, particularly dark memories of the 1980s. They're bringing up the militancy, as they call it, not just a self-defensive fight for survival, as we call it, but they describe it as the militancy. And of course, they explicitly invoke that awful trauma of Operation Blue Star. the attack on the Harmandir Sahib. And these statements, they're not just accidental off-the-cuff remarks, they're deliberate. They're not accidental, they are part of this coordinated, deliberate political strategy. And here's one, I saw this last night, again on social media. Look at it. High alert, terror alert, these big headlines. Intelligence flags possible terror threat. And we all know where that finger of suspicion points because they make it very clear every time. What they're trying to do is they're painting Punjab, particularly in the mainstream press, as an unstable, dangerous border state filled with these hidden radicals, this external threat. Remember, of course, they're all linked apparently to organised terrorist groups, global terrorist groups apparently are pulling the strings of the terrorists, the Khalistanis terrorists in Punjab. And they're painting this belief that there is this constant terror threat from Khalistanis. And so doing that, the central government is attempting to achieve two distinct goals. Firstly, they're trying to terrify the Hindu majority population inside Punjab and indeed across India, forcing these Hindus to run to the BJP as their ultimate protectors. We need you to protect us from these Khalistani terrorists. But the second goal is by convincing the rest of India that Punjab is on the verge of slipping back into chaos, like it was in the 80s and 90s. Delhi creates that perfect political justification to undermine the local state government. In other words, it's all about Delhi taking more and more control. So it's laying this psychological groundwork for, once again, this heavy-handed central intervention, the increased federal policing, and of course more direct control from Delhi. J&K have experienced it. Remember president's rule, every time they roll out president's rule in states in India, which it gives that special emergency powers to central government, essentially to take military control of a state. But this propaganda machine has actually taken, I have to say, quite a more sinister, aggressive turn this week. And Gurpratap Singh Pannoon of Sikhs for Justice, he's picked up on this. And he's actually even released his own video specifically about this very same thing that, as I say, even I've noticed from out here in the UK. I've noticed this agenda that seems to be building up, this new narrative, which is very quickly and aggressively being rolled out. And Gurpratap Singh Pannoon has come up with this phrase, Kanishka 2.0, because even he realises something's up. Now, Kanishka, of course, I probably don't need to tell all of you, I'm sure there can't be many people who don't know. Kanishka is the name of that Air India Flight 182 bombing back in 1985 when 329 innocent people lost their lives on that bombing of an Air India flight that blew up over the Indian Ocean just west of Ireland. And it does, of course, remain one of the most horrific aviation terror attacks in global history. In fact, it was the biggest one pre-9/11. Now, why are we seeing this specific historical tragedy suddenly being dragged back into the headlines? Well, I'll play you, this is Pannoon.
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ 41ਵਾਂ ਵਰਾ ਕਨਿਸ਼ਕਾ ਬੰਬ ਧਮਾਕੇ ਦਾ and the main question is now is India's Modi government planning Kanishka 2.0 every red flag leads to that India's raw agency through Indian diplomats and consulates and with their proxies on the ground who are being used as an extortionist and as assassination hitmen, that they are going to use them to do Kanishka 2.0.
And I'll let him talk on in the background. Now, Pannoon obviously released this video addressing the same exact issue. So he's obviously noticed it. I've noticed it. I'm sure many of you out there have noticed it. He's delivering this, basically it's a stark warning. He's pointing out a raw historical truth that the Indian state essentially got away with using the original 1985 Kanishka tragedy as this highly successful, incredibly powerful stick to beat the Khalistan movement with. And how often have we seen this bombing rolled out in just about every single propaganda, anti-Sikh and anti-Khalistani hit piece ever since. I've pointed out countless examples of it, how they use this bombing to have a go at Khalistanis and prove that they are terrorists. And for 40 years, Delhi has used this ghost of Flight 182 to demonise the diaspora and to silence legitimate political dissent in the West, and of course then to justify its brutal domestic crackdowns on painting the entire Sikh community as threats. But if you look at the footage of Panoon speaking, his main argument obviously is not about the past, it's about the future. And that's the critical warning. His warning that because this strategy worked so perfectly for India before, then it's very likely they're going to try again with a follow-up, a Kanishka 2.0. And he argues that with the highly competitive Punjab elections coming up, and of course the ruling BJP struggling to find traction in Punjab with these elections, the intelligence agencies are now facing massive pressure in India, as in RAW, the NSA, are probably under pressure to create a major national security distraction. They need something to try and reduce the support for the Sikh cause in Punjab, because they're scared that they're losing that election. So the warning being issued by Captain Singh Panoon is obviously very clear. The growing anti-Khalistan warnings in the media, like that, there's no coincidence. It's clearly part of a very coordinated campaign. It's an intentional narrative building exercise. This is the laying the groundwork for what potentially might be coming. I hope to God that we're all wrong. But the state appears to be planting a highly toxic seed in the public mind, preparing the world's press for a catastrophe, and pre-blaming the Sikh community before the incident even occurs. And that is, I have to say, deeply, deeply worrying. Because it brings us directly to a very serious and deeply concerning question that many intelligence analysts, community leaders, elders right across the diaspora are talking about quietly. Is the Indian state really genuinely laying the groundwork for a massive false flag operation? Now, it's all speculation. It could let's hope it is purely just a propaganda exercise, just to try and terrify the Hindu population and others potentially, and particularly in Punjab, for these elections only, just to vote BJP rather than actually planning something. But the trouble is, we've got to look at history. History is obviously always the best guide to the present. And a false flag operation has been used countless times by the Indian state. Now, for those of you who don't understand a false flag operation, it's a tactical manoeuvre where an intelligence agency or a security force secretly carries out a violent attack themselves, but intentionally leaves behind false evidence to blame their political enemies. Now, we know for a fact from declassified government documents, judicial investigations, whistleblowers, that during those years of the 1980s and 90s, elements within India's security agencies frequently used undercover operatives, fake encounters, state-backed actors. They were quite prepared over and over again to sink to the most almost unbelievable dirty tricks to pursue their goal. And that goal was very simple: commit acts of violence to completely discredit the genuine grassroots Sikh political movement. So if a major catastrophic incident were, God forbid, to happen tomorrow, essentially a Kanishka 2.0, then you have to ask the ultimate question. Who benefits? Who benefits from a Kanishka 2.0? Well, clearly the Sikh community and the Khalistan cause does not. An event like that would instantly destroy decades of peaceful, democratic political advocacy built by the diaspora across the West. It would completely isolate Sikh communities here in the UK, Canada, North America, Australia, New Zealand, Europe, everywhere. The damage it would do would be incomparable. It would completely isolate those communities and turn them into targets of global suspicion. And most importantly, it would give Delhi the perfect international excuse to suspend civil liberties and launch another brutal military-style crackdown inside Punjab. And of course, just as people prepare to go to the polls. By naming this terrifying concept, we're aiming to shine, of course, a massive spotlight on this script before they can act it out. We're basically trying to pre-warn everybody. India are trying to pre-warn the world that the Khalistani terrorists are planning an attack. So when it happens, blame Khalistanis. Well, we're also getting in there before the event and saying, if something happens, it's a false flag. Because who benefits? It's not the Khalistan movement. The Khalistan movement is winning. It is winning peacefully and democratically. It does not need to sink to terrorist acts like that. It doesn't need to do violence anymore because it learned from the 80s and 90s violence will not win the war. It's learned that this peaceful democratic process, the referendum, the advocacy and lobbying at the United Nations, it's winning. And this is why India is getting increasingly desperate. So if there is some sort of terrorist attack, it will be a false flag. It will be RAW or the NSA realising that they are losing the narrative and they need something significant to regain the narrative to try and tarnish the Khalistan movement, to try and bring it down because it's winning. And as Panoon states in his own post, there are two strategic objectives of this potential false flag. Firstly, obviously, the referendum, this highly successful referendum that's being rolled out across the diaspora, has been very successful. And I've heard from reliable sources the pro-Khalistan vote numbers in the millions, although they haven't released anything official. Word of mouth from reliable sources is saying literally there are millions of yes votes for Khalistan. So India is desperate to try and stop the referendum continuing to be rolled out. The objective, as Gurpreet Singh Panoon says, is to try and derail and criminalise and suppress the global voting process for Khalistan. And secondly, of course, they're trying to flip the international indictments because their objective is to try and shift international attention away from all those rather embarrassing allegations concerning India's transnational repression, the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, the attempted murder on Gurpreet himself, Avtar Singh Kanda, amongst many others, and of course the ongoing transnational repression, the duties to warn that are still being issued in Canada, in the UK, to members of the Khalistan movement. And here's another example that's I've picked up over the last couple of days. This is, again, part of the same narrative that India's trying to roll out. June the 19th, so I'm going back, 10 days or so. Mainstream Indian media outlets, and I think this is a Malaysian outlet, splashed reports across the front pages claiming that two individuals, allegedly belonging to a banned group called the Khalistan Zindabad Force, were deported from Malaysia and then immediately arrested at Delhi airport. Now, if you actually read the articles across all the media, the Godi media, covering the event, you'll find, surprise, surprise, that the wording is almost entirely identical. Essentially, they've all copy and pasted the same sensational phrases. It's hardcore operatives arrested, major international terror plot foiled, dangerous cross-border conspiracy exposed. But of course, those of us who are used to seeing this and know what's going on here, if you look at the actual mechanics of these stories, every single one of these massive claims comes entirely from one single source. Official security agency press releases from Delhi. There's no independent confirmation, there's no investigative journalism behind any of these articles. There's no verifiable court documents, no public presentation of evidence, not a single quote from a defence lawyer representing these individuals. It's just one single narrative from a single source, Indian intelligence, essentially, who fed the Godi media, who sent out a press release or whichever single source from the Indian government, a single source, have set out the facts, which of course is a narrative. It's a textbook example of what's called source-driven narrative control. Basically, the Indian intelligence services feed a sensational, terrifying story to, of course, a highly compliant, hungry, uncritical mainstream media. They need reports, so they'll take this, thank you very much, copy and paste it, and that's the article. So the media prints that single source as absolute, unquestionable truth. Not asking for any proof or evidence, they just copy and paste it. And within 24 hours, a routine immigration deportation is suddenly magically transformed into definitive proof of a global terror network operating across Southeast Asia. So this unverified story is then picked up by all mainstream politicians on primetime television. Oh, it says Khalistanis again. It says Khalistani terrorists. And then they use it to demand harsher laws, mass digital surveillance, arbitrary preventative arrests across Punjab, etc., etc. That is the standard India playbook. Which comes back to this sort of core structural issue. The default suspicion that sadly, thanks to this narrative, this suspicion that always follows or shadows the Sikh community. The Indian state has created a system where, whether you're a student in Amritsar or a successful business owner in London or Vancouver or wherever, or California or Arizona, the state media, the security apparatus sees you through a single, highly biased lens. You all, by default, according to them, are a potential threat to national security. And not just Indian security, to your host nations. This is what they're trying to do. This is the narrative that they are curating. So, as always in India, whenever the ruling party needs an economic distraction, or if a corruption scandal breaks, or a critical election needs to be won by polarising the public, that same state apparatus just simply turns the dial up on this suspicion. They start creating situations like this. They start sending those warnings across social media. They desperately want the international community, not just the domestic community in India, but they also want the international community to believe that the Sikh diaspora is inherently violent, it's radical, and it's dangerous. That's the narrative that they are trying to create and generate. So we mustn't give in to this fear. We've got to keep doing what we're doing, which is trying to tear down that narrative. Look directly at the people who are holding the strings, who are generating this, and expose this cynical political machinery that's trying to generate this fear and panic. So every time a headline like this appears, we've got to call it out. We've got to see it for what it is and try and, as I always do, join the dots, like I've just done this morning. Gurpatan Singh Panoon's recognised it. As I say, even I've recognised it. So hopefully you guys, I'm sure, have recognised it. But the point is we've got to educate the wider world to what's going on. That the whole thing is manufactured. Primarily because at this precise moment we've got Punjab elections pending. But of course it's not just Punjab elections that are at stake here. It is the greater, the bigger picture. It is ensuring that the Khalistan movement continues its success, continues its successful trajectory. Because Khalistan is coming and India is sinking to the dirtiest tricks it can to try and halt it in its tracks, because it realises it is losing that war. It realises Khalistan is becoming inevitable, which means that they will sink to ever more desperate measures, which is why Kanishka 2.0 is not beyond the realms of possibility. It is scarily probable that it might happen. So we've also got to try and tell the world, if there is a terrorist atrocity, God forbid that there is, and we hope there isn't, it will not be the Khalistan movement behind it, because all the evidence is now pointing to it being generated by the Indian state, like it did in 1985 with the original Kanishka bombing. So be warned and spread the word. Now, talking about Punjab elections, I try not to dig too deeply into Punjab politics because, well, for one thing, it's too complex, and I'm not a Punjabi. And if you don't speak Punjabi, it's a whole new world of complexity and heaven knows what. But ultimately, I do like to keep an overview and an eye on Punjab politics, particularly the significant events, because of course they do have an impact on the diaspora, the diaspora community. And at the moment, there is a lot going on. So, and it is actually, this sort of what's going on at the moment is tending to send shockwaves through the political and religious landscape, not just Punjab, but of course the diaspora. And it's a fundamental constitutional and institutional crisis. And again, I have touched upon this quite a lot quite recently because, again, I do think this is an important story. And it's very reflective of this ongoing battle of power to control the Sikh voice, which therefore is not just in Punjab, but it, of course, is across the diaspora as well. And it refers to this direct standoff between the supreme temporal seat of the Sikh authority, the Akal Takht, and the current Chief Minister of Punjab, Bhagwant Mann. Now, to understand how significant this is, you've got to look past the standard daily political nonsense that sort of hits the mainstream media, and particularly the local news. It's not just a typical argument between political rivals. It's a bigger story than that. It is historic, actually, unprecedented clash over who holds the true sovereign moral authority inside Punjab, and therefore, in turn, has the ability to, I suppose, control the diaspora, at least the Sikh message from the heart of the Sikh faith out to the diaspora. So it matters. Now, on June the 15th, middle of June, the Akal Takht took a very big step. They officially branded Chief Minister Bhagwant Mann as a Guru Dokhi, which basically means a betrayer of the Guru. And they labelled him Panth Virodi, or anti-Sikh. And it all comes back to this video. Now, I'm not going to play the video because if you're a Sikh, and I'm not a Sikh, as you obviously know, but it doesn't take a genius to work out. It is deeply offensive, so I'm not going to play the video. This is just a snapshot from that video, just so at least you can see the scene. And in this video, allegedly, this is of Chief Minister Bhagwant Mann, and he is seen in a very intoxicated state, splashing alcohol onto, there's a portrait on the wall of the Sikh gurus, and he flicks alcohol onto their portraits. And then he does worse things, which I won't describe, because again, it's so offensive. But this allegedly is Bhagwant Mann. And for the global Sikh community, if you're a Sikh, it's not just a lapse in personal judgment. It is seen, what he did in this video, if indeed it is him, it is, of course, an act of profound public sacrilege, beadbi, committed by the highest elected official in Punjab state. So as a result of his actions in this video, or his alleged actions in this video, the Akal Takht had to obviously step in. And they've issued this formal declaration. And by doing so, the Akal Takht has essentially drawn a hard line in the sand. That they are asserting they're a supreme authority to judge the moral conduct of anybody. Any leader, doesn't matter how senior they are. And of course, you don't get more senior than the Chief Minister of Punjab. So again, they've laid out this declaration. Now, this is all leading to a bit of a head, because today, the political fallout from this whole sort of video, and again, as I say, there's been a huge amount in the press, particularly in the Punjabi press, about this, and is the video genuine, and it's been forensically analysed, and allegedly forensically analysed to the conclusion that it is indeed Bhagwant Mann, but there's still those who deny it, including obviously himself, claim it's an AI fake. And I have to say, I've watched it, and I'm not convinced it's Bhagwant Mann, but it doesn't matter what I think. But I mean, you guys can watch it if you want to face watching it and make it your own conclusions. But the point is, the political fallout from everything that's going on, and particularly now the fallout that the Akal Takht has labelled him anti-guru. The fallout is happening fast, actually, and I say today there's a big showdown happening in Punjab. And senior leaders from the ruling Admi party, the AAP, are scheduled to appear in person. They've been summoned to stand in front of the Akal Takht, and they've been summoned to answer for, of course, the highly controversial piece of legislation, which I, again, refer to earlier shows where I've talked about this dangerous piece of legislation, the Jagat Jot Sri Guru Granth Sahib Satkar Amendment Act, which basically is the new Punjabi state's anti-sacrilege bill. And of course, and again, refer to my earlier shows to know how dangerous and why this act is so dangerous for the Sikh community. It's a power grab by Hindutva to control the Guru Granth Sahib Ji. Because if you commit sacrilege, Beadbi, against the Guru Granth Sahib Ji, it gives the Indian state the right to seize the Guru Granth Sahib Ji or anything associated with it and deal with it. And it gives it full legal authority to take it in as evidence, throw it on a shelf, on an evidence shelf, and take full control of the whole process of Beadbi and dealing with it. Whereas previously it was dealt with by the Sikh community, as it should be, and the Gurdwaras, etc. So anyway, that is why this Jagat Jot Sri Guru Granth Sahib Satkar Amendment Act, the Beadbi Act, is so dangerous. So that act was heavily championed, sponsored effectively by Bhagwant Mann and his administration, which of course creates this wonderful irony, if indeed this is Bhagwant Mann. Because he originally pushed this harsh anti-sacrilege law as a political weapon for the reasons I've just explained. He wanted to use it to essentially corner his political opponents, to show the public, it was all part of his sort of PR exercise, public relations exercise, that he was protecting the faith. That he brought it in to prove to the Sikh community, I will look after you. And it was an easy point-scoring exercise leading up to the coming elections. But legal experts and, of course, Panthic scholars, organisations around the Sikh community have pointed out, to a very large extent, very angrily so, very publicly so, that the wording of the bill, apart from the fact it's a danger to the Sikh faith on every level, but they've also pointed out the irony of that bill because of what's happening here, Beadbi. It's trapped its own creator, which is, you can't help but laugh if it is indeed. That law was written deliberately with an incredibly broad, vague, sweeping definition of what it means to, quote, hurt religious feelings or, quote, show disrespect to any sacred items. And it was deliberate, that vague definition, because the definition is so wide. Legal analysts are now arguing, well, they've argued in the past that if you keep a legal definition so wide, it basically means that it can then be arbitrarily applied to anything. You can always argue, it falls into this. If it's vague enough, there's always a way to argue into it. And that is why they believe, legal scholars, particularly in the Sikh community, have argued this is why this bill is so dangerous, because it basically you could almost argue anything is Beadbi and therefore triggers the act, which therefore in turn triggers the ability for the Indian state to take control of any sacred items associated with that Beadbi. In other words, the Guru Granth Sahib Ji. But ironically, as I've pointed out, because that definition is so wide, it now means that you can argue that this video of Bhagwant Mann defacing portraits of the Gurus falls directly under the same criminal scope of his own law. So the very legal trap that he built for his enemies is now basically closed around himself. So tomorrow's meeting at the Akal Takht, where the Akal Takht has summoned the AAP, it's not just about religious protocol. It's an interrogation into how a sitting government can claim to protect the faith while its leader, allegedly, stands accused of violating it. How embarrassing. But it does actually raise some interesting questions. If the video is genuine, then it does genuinely reveal that Bhagwant Mann is, in essence, he's just another tool of the Indian deep state. He's anti-Sikh, as the video proves. He's got no respect for the gurus. Watch the video if you really don't think he does. It's terrible. But also, as champion of these new laws, it reveals the true agenda, as we've covered ourselves. Those laws are not to protect the sanctity of the Guru Granth Sahib Ji, but instead it's just another power grab by Hindutva, RSS, to control and of course then eventually destroy the message of the living Guru. And of course this irony, now that he's been trapped, breaking his own law is just, it's hilarious. But the other side of the coin, if the video is false, who benefits? Well, presumably it's the Sikh community, which would imply that ultimately, if the video is fake, somebody's put it together and it's a dirty trick to try and fight back against this encroaching power grab. In which case, what a delicious way and a very clever way to ensnare Bhagwant Mann. So I don't know. Who knows if that video is genuine or not. But ultimately, it really highlights this battle for sovereignty that is going on in Punjab leading up to, of course, these elections. And the crisis isn't going to end with the meeting today, because, of course, the pressure is building towards a horizon on July the 5th. The SGPC has called for a major extraordinary gathering of Panthic bodies and scholars and community leaders and so on. And the goal of that gathering is very simple. It's to formalise and enforce a total global social and political boycott of Bhagwant Mann himself. So they're calling on the diaspora and domestic institutions to treat the sitting Chief Minister of Punjab as a complete outcast within Panthic spaces. So it is very, very significant. And it's significant to the diaspora as well because it exposes a much deeper structural battle that's happening inside India. And again, I've talked about it at length. I've talked about it in our podcasts. And for years, the central government in Delhi and the state apparatus that it controls have tried for decades actually to bypass, to weaken, undermine and infiltrate traditional Panthic institutions, like of course the SGPC and of course even the Akal Takht itself. They're trying to replace independent Sikh authority with their own Hindutva people, their own placemen. So taking this uncompromising stance against Bhagwant Mann, the Akal Takht is trying to reassert its ancient supreme temporal authority. They're sending a clear message back to Delhi and, of course, the local government. Politicians answer to the Panth, not the other way around. So we'll see what happens in the meeting today. But as I say, this battle for control of Punjab it's been ratcheted up another notch. Clearly, it's as I say, it does have an important impact on the diaspora, not just on internal politics in Punjab. Now, finally, Uttarakhand, and you would have seen earlier in the show the reference to a potential terrorist attack planned in Uttarakhand. You've noticed, many of you might have noticed, there's a lot of news coming out of Uttarakhand in the last few days. Because, of course, there's been quite a bit going on. There is this, it's a bit of a crisis that's been unfolding along the border and mountain roads of Uttarakhand. Over the past week, a series of standoffs involving Sikh pilgrims, right-wing regional groups, and, of course, heavily armed state police has transformed this region into a bit of a battlefield. And almost literally, because it's a situation that's reached boiling point over the last few days. And I just want to talk you through it. I have not talked about the story yet, because I just wanted to see, firstly, what it was all about, and secondly, how it was all going to sort of unfold. Because it did have potential to, like many of these things can do, to escalate into something much bigger, and indeed it has. And I want to talk about the sequence of events that began on June the 16th in a town called Kanaparayag. And it started as just a silly minor civic dispute between a group of travelling Nihangs and local residents, but it then quickly exploded into violence. Now, local right-wing groups mobilised immediately, and eyewitnesses said the situation was quickly given an aggressive communal sort of perspective on it. Now, following the initial clash, The Uttarakhand State Police took immediate, heavy, one-sided action. Surprise, surprise. They arrested 4 Nihangs Sikhs and placed them into judicial custody, but ignoring the local provocateurs who basically started the fight. So once again, it's well, ironically, I'm going to use the same word we use here in the West. It was two-tier policing. It's protecting one side and attacking the other. So the Uttarakhand police arrested the Nihangs, 4 Nihangs. Oop. But the real flashpoint occurred just a few days later at the Nagarasu Gurdwara, and that's located right along the primary pilgrimage route in the Rudraprayag district. Apologies for my pronunciation, hopefully you know where I mean. Angered by what they saw as, unsurprisingly, systemic bias, two-tier policing, a Jata, or group of 7 Nihang Sikhs, staged a dramatic protest. They climbed onto the roof of the Gurdwara. They occupied it for more than 30 hours. There's lots of photos in the press if you want to see them. Basically just a load of Nihangs just standing up there with their curb pants. And the state administration reacted with, as they tend to do in these situations, with maximum force. They deployed massive additional police units, personnel from the Indo-Tibetan Border Police. They all turned up, heavily armed, as usual. And to completely control the flow of information and stop the diaspora or anybody else actually outside across India from seeing the truth of what was happening, they took the usual step of completely suspending mobile internet services across the whole area. Rudraprayag and Srinagar regions. They just closed down communications. Typical Indian tactic this. Stop the information flow. Now, negotiators eventually managed to de-escalate that rooftop standoff, but the anger across the community didn't stop there. And as news of the arrests and the internet shutdowns did actually travel through word of mouth back to Punjab, grassroots organisations realised that they had to do something about this. So a massive Jata group of Nihangs set out from Mahali's historic Gurdwara, Singh Shahidan. They marched directly toward Uttarakhand to support the pilgrims and demand the immediate release of the 4 detained Sikhs. And I'm just, as I'm telling this, it does actually bring to mind the Sikh genocide. And it's very typical. This is, again, something very admirable about the Sikh community. If a group of Sikhs are in trouble, the community unites and will march to defend. And it brings back memories of, well, I don't remember it, but it brings back reports of the Sikh genocide when a whole battalion or certainly a company of Sikh soldiers in the Indian army. Oh, sorry, it's Blue Star. When they heard what was happening at Blue Star, that the Indian army was attacking the Hamdar Sahib, a whole company of the Sikh regiment mutinied and said, no, we are marching. And they set off for Amritsar to try and defend their fellow Sikhs when they were so outraged by what had happened, the injustice. But this obviously has resonance of that because, of course, Nihangs in Punjab heard what was going on and what had happened. So, of course, they had they did exactly the same. They marched in support. I'll show you a bit of video, actually. This is from the Godi media coverage. I'll let this play in the background so at least you can see what was going on. Now, by the night of June the 25th, a few days ago, it led to this dramatic sort of high-stakes showdown, as you can... Oh, sorry. There you go. This sort of showdown at the border checkpoint. This is in the Vikasnagar area. That's the gateway between Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand. And the Uttarakhand administration had converted the entire border outpost into some sort of virtual military fortress. And images from the scene, as you can see here, showed multiple layers of barricades, riot police in full tactical gear. You'll see it in a second, actually. Barbed wire set up specifically to block the incoming army of Sikhs, and I'm chuckling away because it gets the blood going up. This bully son of hell, you want to sort of join in and join the Nihangs marching, saying how dare you? This sense of injustice. It's a hugely powerful motivator. Anyway, so when the Jata arrived, hundreds of Nihangs, you can see, in their wonderful traditional blue attire, an intense physical confrontation broke out. So refusing to be turned back from their ancestral right to complete the pilgrimage, the Nihangs completely justifiably used physical force to breach these barricades, pushing directly through the lines. Now, the leadership of the group stood there firmly on the highway, declaring to reporters and senior police officers that they will stay and camp there, would not return to Punjab until those 4 arrested brothers were safely released. And, surprise, surprise, here we go again. Human rights enters the equation once again. Of course, it's abuse of human rights once again. Sikh leaders, legal bodies, began coordinating the defence for the 4 Nihangs. But it turns out horrific details began leaking out regarding their treatment in custody. Representatives from prominent Sikh bodies have openly alleged that the detained pilgrims were subjected to severe, illegal, third-degree torture by the Uttarakhand police. I mean, are we surprised when we know that every police station in India has a torture cell? So are we surprised that it's likely these 4 Nihangs were tortured? I mean, it's just unforgivable. This is India, a state that's trying to claim it's a democracy, trying to claim it's a future superpower, and it's torturing people who are arrested. And according to statements, multiple pilgrims have had their legs systematically broken whilst in custody. Police officers have also forcibly removed and desecrated dastars of the detainees during interrogation. So again, it's the allegations, if true, are just both typical and so disturbing. Anyway, fortunately, yesterday, a major legal breakthrough occurred. The courts finally did grant bail to the Nihangs, and immediately upon their release, the group crossed the state line into Himachal Pradesh and sought refuge at a local Gurdwara. But of course, things are pretty tense and remain so. 150 pilgrims still actively camped at the border as we speak, refusing to move until every single traveller is accounted for and allowed to undertake their journey to Hemkund Sahib without fear of violence. And if the physical violence on the roads isn't enough, the political rhetoric surrounding the story it's more of the same. A prominent political figure from right-wing Uttarakhand Kranti Dal and a guy from this group called Ashish Negi, he released a highly provocative statement when this is all going on. And he actually explicitly threatened the Sikh community with, quote, a repeat of June 1984. So he's a high-profile political figure, has openly threatened the Sikh community with a repeat of Operation Blue Star. Basically, it's a public appeal for mass murder, state-sponsored genocide, and the military destruction of the holiest shrine. Again, it's just... Anyway, the Jatadar of the Akhil Takht, Jani Kuldip Singh Gargaj, he immediately reacted to that. And he said that he warned the Uttarakhand government that figures like this, Ashish Negi, the people like that are a direct threat to the peace and harmony of the whole region. They cannot get away with stuff like this. And the Jatadar made it clear that the Sikh community will not sit idly by while their fundamental right to wear their kakars, the 5Ks, is systematically questioned and targeted by the right-wing mob across the region. So they issued a definitive ultimatum to the Uttarakhand government: identify who's behind this, launch criminal proceedings against them, or else. And the Jatadar formally directed the SGPC to file a legal case against this guy, Ashish Negi, in Amritsar courts, just to essentially set a legal precedent. But most importantly, the Jatadar delivered a historic warning to the state leadership in Dehradun. And he stated that if the state-backed harassment, the profiling, the targeting of Sikh and Punjabi travellers doesn't stop instantly, then the Akal Takht will be compelled to take a major formal decision of boycotting completely all travel and pilgrimage to Uttarakhand. So in other words, it's escalated the whole situation. And it is a national defence of Sikh dignity. But this whole situation is the perfect real-time proof of the default suspicion that the Sikh community is facing in India and globally. It shows that this anti-Sikh pre-election propaganda that's being manufactured in Delhi it's not just empty political rhetoric. It has real violent consequences out there on the ground. If travelling pilgrims are subjected to profiling, arbitrary profiling, torture, threats of a repeat of 1984, simply for carrying their sacred symbols, it proves that the right to defend pantheist sovereignty and protect diaspora civil liberties is more urgent than ever. In other words, this is no conspiracy theory. It's actually happening daily in both India and, fortunately to a slightly lesser degree, in the diaspora. So this is why it's important to follow what's going on in Punjab and the locality, that whole region, because it has real world consequences right across the world. Anyway, let's move on to our comments column. Thank you again, all of you wonderful people. And yes, you'll notice logo, because apologies to you guys, I did forget. And I even predicted I would forget. It's very hard for me to remember. So as a result, for the next foreseeable future, I'm going to keep this little reminder here. Yes, Hardal Singh. It's all thanks to you. Thanks for taking my comments about the logo. Indeed, there you go. Because I keep forgetting. Because in the enthusiasm of delivering the show, I keep forgetting to press the button to remove that logo. So anyway, I will keep this little logo reminder here just to remind me to remove the logo. So thank you, Hardile, for your continued reminders. Mr. 403, maybe make it semi-transparent. That's actually not a bad idea. It does require a bit of technical know-how. Oh, gosh, you can see my eyes rolling and that resigned sigh. Maybe I'll try. Anyway, Amakara says, I love it even more now. Well, there you go. Love it so much. I'll pop it back very briefly again. 1S, 1 and 2. Let's get serious now. Yes, this is the Namdari sect. Essentially, it's more of these sort of fake Sikhs. They tend to align with the Indian government narrative. They don't really align with the Sikh faith at all. They practice Hindu rituals. And they have only one master. Clearly that master isn't Vaheguruji. It's not the Sikh faith. They've got their own masters, and they essentially are, by default, they're Hindus, really. Ultimately, they are the subset of Hinduism. They have a person they see as their Sat Guru, is a continuation of the Guruship of Guru Nanak. It's a splinter group, which is not true to the Sikh faith, clearly. And they try to normalise Indian influence and whitewash these human rights abuses. I mean, they try, but people like me are going to continue to highlight it. And they try to turn the narrative to Indians versus colonial past, when indeed India is still a colonial country. It is still colonised by that Brahmanical elite. So thank you, Honest, I wanted to, for highlighting and telling us, informing people like me about the truth of what's going on. Punjab, thank you for your comment. It was a long comment. I just grab the first bit because this is an important bit. I talked about Terry Milewski of CBC and his anti-Sikh and anti-Khalistan propaganda that he constantly rolls out. But as you say, it's the CBC network. It's not just Milewski. It's his whole network that essentially have got an agenda to target the Sikh communities. You rightly point out, they said, for example, in a recent article, Sikhs were a closed fanatical bunch, impossible to penetrate, as CSIS have tried. The Sikhs are the CSIS's first and greatest failure and Canada's international shame. Well, there's an agenda writ large. I mean, there's a narrative that isn't impartial at all. So you rightly point out that CBC clearly has an anti-Sikh agenda. In other words, they will fit the evidence to suit their narrative. And as you rightly said, there was one article recently that the WSO had a go at. And Terry Milewski accused WSO of fabricating the counter story that the WSO came up with, saying, no, that's not true. Malowski had a go at the WSO and actually was forced to apologise after realising Malowski was in the wrong and the World Sikh Authority, the World Sikh Organisation, beg your pardon, were correct. So again, this is the ongoing battle for the narrative, and this is why we must never ever relax, because this propaganda war is just ramping up and it's constant. Stay safe, thank you, stay safe. That you remind us that Vikash Yadav has now moved up into the most wanted top 10 of the FBI, and that link is, of course, to the FBI's own page. Vikash Yadav, one of the gentlemen, actually that's not the right word, I wouldn't call him a gentleman, one of the men associated with that plot, the assassination plot of Gurpatant Singh Pannoon. Have you seen Vikash Yadav? And Gobind Singh reminds us, of course, when we talk about Kanishka, the Kanishka bombing, who was behind it? Well, we all know who did it, like they also murdered Sidhu Musiwala, amongst many others. I wonder how long that list of murdered Sikhs, and not just Sikhs actually, I wonder how long the killing list is of RAW and the NSA, one wonders. Jagtar Sidhu. Yes, we talked about Bhindranvali and the Shaheeds, the martyrs. And as you rightly say, Jagtar, salute to Bhindranvali ji, the saint and soldier of the Guru Sahib. Martyrdom, it is the noblest cause in Sikhism. And their names are shining like a star in the world history. And of course, we do remember them regularly and we do revere them, justifiably so. Bhindranvali ji, of course, sits over my shoulder. It is an honour to have Bhindranvali ji watching over my shoulder, hopefully guiding me from wherever he is right now. But one of our regular critics, S. Simba, hello S. Simba, welcome back. Because of Bhindranvali ji, you claim that thousands of Sikhs got killed. He's not a saint, he's a crook according to you. Well, I think we all beg to differ on that one. And I'm not actually sure that Bhindranvali ji was responsible for the death of thousands of Sikhs. I think those who pull the triggers of Operation Blue Star, and others, the Indian Army, were the ones who actually murdered thousands of Sikhs and in turn murdered Bhindranvali ji and his fellows. So when one has to argue who actually are the crooks, who actually were breaking not just the law, but the code of morality, of human morality. And it wasn't Bhindranvali ji. So anyway, but thank you for your ongoing contributions, S. Simba. Avatar Dillon. Yeah, this is an important point. It is. Freedom fighters, as I often say, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. Who actually defines what is a terrorist and what is a freedom fighter? This is a permanent, perennial debate across the whole world, across every cause, is that one side are freedom fighters, but the other side accuses them of being terrorists. There is no right and wrong. As you rightly say, Avatar, Guru Nanak said, look, we're all children of one creator. We can't judge. It is not up to us to accuse another of being a terrorist or being a freedom fighter. God is the ultimate judge of all humans, as you rightly say. So it doesn't matter what labels we give people. Ultimately, we will one day, all of us, without exception, stand in front of our creator and be judged. So be warned. Live a good life, otherwise, God help you. Stay safe. Yeah, absolutely. You talk about at length, and I don't necessarily have time to go through in detail, but ultimately you do talk about, you remind us of Bhindranvali ji's heroic stance and all those freedom fighters who were literally battling for their, not just their survival, but battling for their principles in the Harmandir Sahib in 1984. And as you say, an ex-SAS sergeant major said a defensive position like that was one of the hardest ones to fight. And because of, well, I won't get into the detail, but ultimately, it just, Stacey's comment just reinforces the heroism of those defenders of the Harmandir Sahib in June 1984. Is that, because we had this critic who came back, who was on the show a few days ago, who had a go at Bhindranvali ji and the freedom fighters, saying, they're just a bunch of cowards. And as I said, really? It's very easy to be an armchair warrior with your keyboard and accuse the likes of Bhindranvali ji of being, well, he came up with some pretty offensive accusations. It's very easy to make those accusations, but you have absolutely no concept of the heroism it took to stand and fight. Not to surrender like most normal people would do, but to actually literally sacrifice your life, give the ultimate sacrifice for your principles, which is what they all did in the Harmandir Sahib in 1984. And B. Sandu, also the term Sikh terrorist, it's an oxymoron. That means those two words don't stand together. Completely mutually exclusive. You cannot be a Sikh and a terrorist. Excuse me. Hay fever is really bad at the moment. Yeah, absolutely. Just by definition. And for those who understand what the Sikh faith is, what it represents, you cannot be, by definition, a Sikh and a terrorist. As you say, they are mutually exclusive, those two terms, much as India tries to claim otherwise. Punjab returns. Your show went out 6 hours ago. Yes, indeed, the views were very low last week. And yeah, the show went out the usual time, and it was very slow to pick up. As you noticed, Punjab, is the weather getting to UKites? Indeed. Last week, good heavens, we registered here in London. I think we hit, actually, I did see 40 degrees on a thermometer. I think officially it was 39 or something. It was unbearable. And here in the UK, we're just not used to the heat. You know, if it hits 20 degrees, we're out there with the barbecues celebrating and, you know, tops off. But when it hits sort of the late 30s, yes, the UK tends to sort of just close down. It's we just can't cope with it. We don't have air conditioning generally here in the UK, so we suffer. So God help us if we move to Khalistan. Anyway, but yes, indeed. But actually, I did notice certain shows in recent weeks have been throttled massively by the algorithm. It's very, very noticeable when you look at our statistics from our side. It's really noticeable how many of our shows are really throttled. The engagement's very high. The likes, the comments are very high, but the actual viewing numbers are very low, which is a clear sign that we are very deliberately being throttled by YouTube. Bobby, thank you. Very nice coverage. Well, thank you for your comment. Much appreciated. Amric, oh yes, this is a lovely comment. You defined Sikhi beautifully, Angus. Thank you millions. Well, apart from the fact it was a pleasure, it's a huge compliment to receive that I define Sikhi, because it implies that I understand it. I don't fully understand it. I'd never be so bold as to say I fully understand Sikhi. I haven't read the Guru Granth Sahib Ji. I don't speak Punjabi, and only then would I genuinely be able to understand, I think, and live it, you know, to understand it. But the fact that if you say I do understand it, or at least I can define it beautifully, that in itself means that my educational journey has just passed a huge milestone, and I do appreciate that. So thank you for the comment. Stuff to muffins, absolutely. Please, all taxi lorry drivers, spread the word. Share, like, subscribe, all that YouTubey stuff. Please, we need to get the numbers up. We must get the numbers up. So please, a huge appeal to all of you. Please mention it in your Gurdwaras, mention us in your communities, mention it to your mates. We need to try and get the views up. We can't do it through normal organic means like a YouTube channel would do, because they're trying to close us down. They're doing everything they can. They've demonetized us. They're trying to throttle our videos. So it's the only way we can grow this channel is through you guys. So please, a huge appeal to you guys. To spread the word. And Country Punjab gets one of the final comments of the show, as does Sukhwant Singh and Jaskarat Singh. Azad Punjab Zindabad, Khalistan Zindabad, as Sukhwant Singh says, Khalistan Zindabad, Vaiguruji, Chadi Kala, Khalistan Zindabad. Indeed. Our usual sign off for the show. Thanks to you all for all your comments. Do keep them coming. Email me links, stories that you think I need to know about or talk about, as many of you have been doing. Thank you very much for all your contributions. Comment below anything of your thoughts, stories I need to cover, things you might have seen across social media that I might not have picked up on. I need you guys to act as my researchers, because that's how we ensure that the community hears the truth and we fight back against this dreadful narrative and this worrying narrative building from India. We need to fight back against this hugely. But that's it for another day. Thanks so much for watching. Thank you for your loyalty. Much appreciated. God willing, I'll catch you guys tomorrow.